Invincible is a series that showcases heroes and the consequences of their heroic acts quite perfectly. We see how with each time Invincible does something as a hero, it usually affects his personal life and the ones that are important to Mark. This is mainly showcased with his main relationships like Amber, Eve, his mom, and etc. I feel like most superhero related stories cover this, as it gives you a way to understand that heroes aren't perfect and are sometimes just as vulnerable as the ones they are saving. But what I can say we haven't seen in this show slash comic yet was a villain who was a direct result of Mark's mistake. And this is what this week's episode of Invincible covers, a direct consequence of Mark and Omni Man's squabble back in the season 1 finale. I love how they go out of their way to show Mark's life that day wasn't the only one that would change forever. This fight not only left a permanent mark on, well, Mark, but also a permanent mark on the entire world. They had to rebuild and try to get past and pretty much forget everything that happened that day. However, a man named Jesse Pinkman, Scott Duval, dedicated his life to taking down Invincible for the death of his sister. As the result of Omni Man and Invincible's battle caused major collateral damage, and his sister was a part of it. Now, of course, Mark didn't mean to do this obviously, but it's the fact that this man spiraled into madness and ended up becoming one of Invincible's biggest haters, being up there with the likes of Angstrom. Scott, despite having a wife and child, dedicated to killing Invincible, with his wife being fully supportive on the matter. It gets to such a point that Powerplex becomes a supervillain and used his ability to absorb and release energy to lure Invincible. He'd go on to beat up most of the Guardians of the Globe and use his wife and child as bait to lure Invincible and tell him how he's not a hero. And it's not like he forced them to do this. Originally, this was a plan that he kind of just put aside, but after his loving wife hears him out, she decides to actually play a part in this entire thing. Now, when Powerplex gets a hold of Invincible and absorbs a ridiculous amount of energy, the energy would begin to scatter all across the floor that his wife and child are currently held hostage on. The energy that Powerplex was giving off would hit his wife and child and burn them instantly. All he could see is just the remnants of his wife holding the remnants of his child, and not really thinking that the energy would travel to them. His powers were capable of harming Invincible to a degree, so it's obvious that two normal humans would be instantly killed if they were caught in the crossfire. The same thing he blamed Mark for before this moment is now the very same act he caused on the woman he loved and the son he raised. This causes him to lose his mind and blame Invincible for their death, but we know obviously this isn't true. Mark would drain Powerplex of the energy he absorbed and would take him to prison, with Powerplex swearing revenge on Mark the next time they meet. Now, I do want to talk about stuff that the show hasn't gotten into yet, but before that, I wanted to say that Powerplex's story up to this point isn't really all that complex. If I'm being honest, it's pretty basic. But I don't think this makes his story any less tragic and any less important for Mark as a superhero. Scott was someone who hurt the closest ones to him because of his revenge, even when the love of his life stood by his side. Mark as well by this point is a hero whose morals are honestly shifting constantly, who always has to pay the price of either holding back or not holding back. But what Mark didn't expect was to pay the price of his father's mistakes. And the day that would forever change his life. Now, I'm going to be moving into comic book stuff, so 3, 2, 1, goodbye Prime users. Anywho, Powerplex during the Invincible War would manage to escape, with him attacking Mark after the war was over. He'd blame him for the damage the other Marks caused and would be sent to prison until he comes back once again after Cecil gives him another chance. That way, Powerplex can actually be used to make a difference, since his powers are pretty ridiculous. After hearing about Mark's collateral damage in his battle with Dinosaurus in Las Vegas, he would try to jump Mark once again and blame him for the damage he caused. Mark is always leaving a path of destruction, and this is what caused Powerplex to ruin his life. At least, that's what Scott thinks. However, in this altercation, Mark would finally manage to reach Scott by saying he's to blame for their death. There isn't a day that goes by where Mark doesn't feel bad for what happened in his fight with Omni Man. He was powerless and watching his father cause all of this destruction, and it definitely left a scar on him. But what he didn't do was kill Scott's family. The electricity traveled to them. That was not Mark's fault, that was Scott's. And after this, Powerplex finally breaks down. Scott was so dedicated to revenge that he managed to gaslight himself into thinking Invincible caused everything, when in reality he caused more damage than harm compared to Invincible by the end of everything. Invincible does take responsibility for the damage he caused that day, along with any casualty that he may face as Invincible, which is why he helps Scott take responsibility in his own actions as well. In this moment, he holds accountability for what he's done, and it allows Scott to also understand the gravity of the situation. I'm really happy I picked up the Invincible comics and seeing just how much of a masterpiece I've been missing out on. If you want more Invincible related videos, let me know down below what you'd like to see next, and I'll see you guys in the next one.